On the night Virginia decided what kind of child it would allow a governor's wife to carry, I was still just boy. No name on the payroll ledgers, no mention in the speeches, just a pair of young hands they trusted to carry wine trays and secrets through marble halls. I remember the way the storm pressed its face against the windows of the Richmond residence, rattling the glass like it was trying to listen in. Inside, the governor paced his study, fingers stained with ink and ambition, while his pale, beautiful wife sat very still in the parlor, one hand on her flat belly, as if cradling something that wasn't there yet. By midnight, 3 lives would be tied together by a decision no one would ever confess to making, least of all the boy they chose to blame. Before I unwind how I went from boy to the sin written into that woman's womb, I want you to do something for me. If you're listening to this right now, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and whether your town has an old house people still whisper about. Sometimes the walls remember more than the people do. My name is Josiah. Back then, they almost never used it. Boy was faster, easier to shout down a hallway or into a kitchen. I was 18 years old and had lived most of those years on plantations that smelled of damp cotton, manure, and iron. When they moved me to the governor's residence in Richmond, people said it was a blessing. Compared to the fields, maybe it was. No more rows of cotton. Instead, long corridors, polished banisters, an air heavy with cigar smoke, and the ghosts of Latin phrases I couldn't pronounce. But a cage is still a cage, even when it has chandeliers. The residence stood on a rise above the city, a white pillared house that seemed to stare down at the streets like a magistrate over a courtroom. By day it was a stage. Coaches arrived in a clatter of hooves and polished wheels, unloading men in dark coats and women in silks that whispered as they moved. There were speeches, handshakes, laughter, words like honor and virtue tossed around like confetti. At night, when the lamps burned low and the city quieted, the house felt different. The ceilings seemed too high, the hallways too long, and the portraits of dead men watched everything. It was in that house that I learned how power works when no one is watching. I learned that a man can stand in a church pulpit and weep over the sanctity of family, then go home and talk about his wife's womb as if it were a broken tool that needed replacing. I learned that an 18-year-old slave boy can become the most dangerous person in a room simply because of what his body can do, and that nothing is more terrifying to powerful men than a child whose bloodline they cannot fully control. Governor Edmund Fairfax was a tall man, not handsome but imposing, with the kind of angular face that looked carved rather than born. His hair was going grey at the temples, and he wore it like proof of how much he had sacrificed for Virginia. When he spoke in the assembly, people said the room quieted. I only ever watched him speak in private, though. In his study, pacing with his hands behind his back, voice lowered, words sharpened for smaller audiences. His wife, Lydiana, was the opposite of him in almost every visible way. Where he was all hard lines and angles, she was softness set in place, like a porcelain figurine someone had been afraid to touch too hard. Her hair was the color of pale wheat, arranged in careful coils. Her skin was so fair, the veins on her wrists looked like blue threads sewn under the surface. She moved quietly, almost without sound, through rooms designed for being seen. People called her distant, cold, frail. I saw something else, even before I understood it. A person pressed so hard into the shape others demanded that she never had a chance to find out what she might have been on her own. They had no children. That fact hung in the air of the residence like old smoke. It clung to conversations, to glances, to the way people's eyes drifted toward Lydiana's waist and then politely away again. 3 years of marriage, they said. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of doctors and whispered prayers and herbs from old women who claimed to know the secrets of the body. 3 years of nothing. If you work in the downstairs of a house like that, kitchen, laundry, stables, you learn to hear things no one intended you to hear. Sound travels down. Words drop through floorboards. Thin walls and careless footsteps reveal more about a household than any written inventory ever will. I heard plenty. I heard the governor's mother, a woman whose spine seemed held up by rage and pride alone, accuse Lydiana of failing her duty. My son did not climb this high for the Fairfax name to end with an empty cradle, she hissed one night after dinner, when she thought only the parlor walls could hear her. I was in the adjoining room, stacking wood. The people need to see continuity, strength, a family, not fragility. I heard the family doctor's measured voice explaining probabilities and incompatibilities, using words that sounded polite but felt like verdicts. There is a chance, Governor, that the issue does not lie with your wife, he said once, when I was refilling the decanter in the study and they had forgotten I existed. But these matters are delicate. I would advise discretion. And I heard, more than once, the muffled sound of a woman crying alone behind a closed door. My work carried me between worlds. In the mornings, I lit fires, polished banisters, helped haul in deliveries. In the afternoons, I sometimes served in the dining room, carrying dishes in and out, refilling glasses. In the evenings, I might be sent to the library with a tray, or to the parlor with tea, or to the stables with instructions. I belonged everywhere and nowhere, a moving piece of furniture with ears. The first time Lydiana really looked at me was on a soft, grey afternoon when the sky threatened rain but never followed through. I had been sent to bring up a crate from the cellar, extra crystal glasses wrapped in old newspapers that smelled like dust and ink. As I came up the back stairs, moving carefully so as not to clink the glass together, I heard a small commotion in the hallway outside the morning room. A child, one of the housemaids' little ones, who sometimes wandered in from the quarters, had slipped on a loose rug and gone down hard, scraping his knee. He wasn't bleeding badly, but the shock had opened his mouth, and he was screaming like his world had ended. "Lord have mercy," the housekeeper muttered, already panicking about noise traveling where it shouldn't. "Hush now! Hush!" People get rough when they're scared of being noticed. I'd seen enough slaps given to crying children in the quarters to know that. So before anyone could grab the boy and yank him to his feet, I set the crate down, reached out, and scooped him up. He was light, all bone and big eyes and fear. I held him against my chest, one hand steadying his back, the other cupping the back of his head. "Easy," I said softly, rocking us both just a little. "Breathe now. You're all right. Just a fall. Ground's always been there. It's the getting up that matters." My mother had said that to me once, after my first beating. The words came out of my mouth before I fully knew I was borrowing them from her. The boy hiccuped, then sobbed into my shoulder, snot and tears soaking into my shirt. I didn't care. I shifted him to see his knee, wiped the dirt away with my thumb. The scrape was harmless. He'd live. I murmured nonsense to him until the sobs turned to sniffles. When I finally lifted my head, there she was. Lydiana stood in the doorway of the morning room, one hand on the frame, as if she needed it to stay upright. She was dressed in a pale blue gown that made her skin look almost translucent, the color of veins showing faintly at her temples. Her eyes, gray, not cold yet, just tired, were fixed on my hands. On the way, I was holding the child. For a moment, we were the only two people in the house. I dropped my gaze automatically. The habit trained into me like breathing. "Ma'am," I muttered, stepping back, ready for a rebuke, an order, a slap that would remind everyone of their place. But none of that came. Instead, she said in a voice so quiet I almost didn't catch it, "You're very gentle with him." There was something in her tone I couldn't name then, not kindness, not exactly envy, something twisted and sad, like a melody you recognize without remembering the words. I didn't know how to answer, so I didn't. I just stood there, the boy's weight warm in my arms, my heart thudding against his cheek. She looked at us for a heartbeat longer, then turned away, her skirts whispering over the polished floor. Before she disappeared down the hallway, I saw her hand drift, almost unconsciously, to rest over her own flat abdomen. That was the first time I sensed that whatever was wrong in that house went deeper than what anyone said aloud. Months passed like that, small moments stacked on top of each other, building something I wouldn't recognize until it was too late. The winter was sharp but short. The fireplaces burned constantly, the smoke and heat making the halls feel closer than they had in summer. The governor's speeches grew more fervent as an election season approached. Men came and went, leaving muddy footprints and promises behind them. In the kitchen, the talk turned often to heirs. Whenever someone's wife, cousin, or daughter announced a pregnancy, the news would be compared, half in jest, to the empty cradle upstairs that still sat in a guest room closet, a gift from some distant relative delivered 3 years prior and never used. "Did you see Mrs. Albright?" one of the maids said once, kneading bread with more force than necessary. "Big as a house. Married after Madame too. Poor Lady Fairfax. Must sting." "Poor?" the housekeeper sniffed. "She's got a roof, jewelry, servants. Poor is for people who don't know where their next meal coming from. She just ain't done the one thing a woman's supposed to do." That sentence hung in the air, ugly and heavy. I saw one of the older women in the kitchen glance toward the doorway, where 2 young slave girls were plucking feathers from a chicken, their faces carefully blank. They were old enough to bleed, but not yet old enough to realize their bodies would never truly belong to them, not in Virginia, not in a house like this. I didn't fully understand the mechanics of what made a baby, but I understood enough about blame. I'd seen boys whipped because a bull died in the field, girls punished because a mistress had a bad dream. I understood how power flowed downhill and pooled in the bodies of those who could not say no. So, when I was called to the governor's study one evening after supper, it didn't feel like anything but another command, another turn of the wheel. The study smelled of leather and pipe smoke, and something sour beneath both. Shelves of books lined the walls, their spines cracked from use. A map of Virginia hung behind the desk, rivers and counties marked in neat ink. The governor stood with his back to the map, hands resting on the desk, his posture relaxed in a way I knew was calculated. boy," he said. "Come closer." I obeyed. I always obeyed. He looked me over the way he might inspect a horse in the stables. Not leering, exactly, just assessing. Judging muscles, height, the way I carried my shoulders. "You've been here, what, a year now?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "No trouble?" His tone suggested that trouble was something I carried inside me like a disease he was checking for. "No, sir. Housekeeper tells me you're quick to learn, strong back, good work ethic." He paused, his gaze moving to my face, lingering there. "And discreet. You understand what that word means?" "I don't repeat what I hear, sir," I said, my mouth dry. He smiled, thin and sharp. "Good. A house like this can't function if every whisper turns into a rumor by morning. Secrets are necessary." The word settled between us like a stone dropped into a well. He picked up a crystal glass from the desk, turned it in his hand so the lamplight caught it, casting fractured patterns on the ceiling. "Tell me, boy, you ever been with a woman?" It took me a moment to understand what he meant. When I did, heat rushed to my face. No one had ever asked me that before, and the very idea that I owe anyone an answer to that question made something coil tight in my stomach. Sir, he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Your expression is answer enough. I forget sometimes we don't have to teach you certain things out there. Nature provides the education, even where the law denies the ceremony." His eyes flicked briefly in the direction of the quarters, then back to me. "Never mind, it's not romance I'm asking about. It's function." Function! Like I was a tool he was considering using for some unpleasant task. He took a step closer. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the sheen of sweat at his temple. "There are things a man of my position must think about that you will never have to, boy. Legacy, bloodlines, the perception of stability. A household without an heir invites questions. Questions invite rivals. Do you understand?" "I think so, sir." "Good. Then I'll speak plainly, and you will listen carefully." He set the glass down with a soft clink. For the first time, there was no performative weight in his posture. He looked tired, desperate even, though he'd never admit it. "The doctor has concerns," he said. "He thinks the time for hoping in the usual way has passed. My wife is not getting younger. Virginia does not wait. An heir is required. To the world, that heir must be mine. Do you follow?" My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I heard the words, but they didn't arrange themselves into a shape my mind could look at directly. Yes, sir," I said, though in truth I only understood enough to be afraid. He studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of comprehension. "You are a healthy young man," he continued. "No visible defects. Your mother, God rest her, had strong features. Your father, whoever he was, must have been sufficiently vigorous." His lip curled slightly around the last phrase. "These things matter, even down there." My throat tightened. He was talking about breeding like he was selecting stock. I'd seen this kind of conversation happen in the quarters, over mares and bulls. I had never imagined myself standing in the middle of one. "I have considered sending my wife away quietly," he said, "to a cousin's estate. Let nature arrange things there in the shadows, as it has in other families. But distance creates danger. Too many variables. Here, in this house, I can control the variables." He stepped so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath, the faint sourness of stale wine. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, boy?" A terrible idea bloomed in my mind, slow and choking, that the governor of Virginia was talking about using my body to solve a problem he could not admit he had. "No, sir," I whispered. It was half truth, half prayer. He smiled again, that same thin, mirthless curve. "You will," he said, "soon enough." I was dismissed then, but not freed. He told me to report to the overseer of the household, Mr. Tate, for further instructions. The words tasted like poison. I left the study on hollow legs, the wallpaper and portraits in the corridor blurring at the edges of my vision. Mr. Tate found me before I could find him. He was a narrow man with a pencil mustache and eyes that never seemed to fully open, as if he only half cared to see the world he helped enforce. He cornered me in the passageway near the servants' staircase. "The governor spoke to you?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir." He nodded as if I'd confirmed something inevitable. "Then listen to me carefully, boy. The next few days, you are going to be given some unusual tasks. You will say, 'Yes, sir,' and 'Yes, ma'am,' and you'll do exactly what you are told. You will make no mention of it to anyone. Not in the quarters, not in the kitchen, not out back, not even in your sleep if you dream. If one word of this reaches ears it shouldn't, I will personally see to it you never speak again. Understand?" Fear crawled icy fingers up my spine. "Yes, sir." He grabbed my jaw then, fingers digging into the flesh hard enough to bruise, forcing my eyes up to his. "I don't think you do," he said softly. "You're being granted a kind of proximity. Most of your kind don't get with her ladyship. Don't mistake that for favor. It's utility. Tools that break get thrown out. Tools that talk get burned. You follow me?" "Yes, sir," I repeated, the words strangled by his grip. He let go, smoothed his vest as if he'd brushed off some dust. "Good. Go back to your regular duties. When you're needed, you'll be sent for." The days that followed felt like the pause before a storm breaks. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow seemed to hold an audience. I caught the governor watching me at odd moments, during breakfast as I poured coffee, in the hallway as I carried linens upstairs. His gaze slid over me like a measured weight, checking again and again to see if the tool he'd chosen was still intact. I avoided looking at Lydiana. It felt dangerous, as if eye contact might turn an unspoken thing into something real. But avoidance can be conspicuous too. One afternoon, when I was dusting the banister on the upper floor, she stepped out of her room and caught me mid-motion. There was no escaping her then. "Josiah," she said. The sound of my name in her mouth startled me more than if she'd shouted. She almost never used any of our names. Few of them did. "Yes, ma'am," I said, bowing my head. "Come here a moment." I set down the cloth and approached. My pulse beat so loudly in my ears that it drowned out footsteps from below, the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the shriek of a wagon wheel outside. She studied me the way one looks at a strange painting, searching for meaning in the shapes. "Did my husband speak to you this week?" she asked. My mouth went dry. Yes, Mom." "Did he tell you why?" "No, Mom." The lie felt heavy on my tongue, but another kind of honesty felt more dangerous. She seemed to accept that answer on the surface, but something in her eyes said she heard more than the words. "I see," she murmured. She glanced down the hallway, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Have you ever known a woman to bleed every month and then stop?" I swallowed. I knew about the bleeding. Everyone did, in the quarters. Women marked their months with cloth and whispered calculations. They knew when a missed bleeding brought hope or dread. I also knew that talk about such things across the line between their world and ours was forbidden. "Yes, ma'am," I said softly. "Sometimes it means she carrying." Lydiana's hand went unconsciously to her belly. There was still no swell there, just fabric and bone. "Sometimes," she repeated, "and sometimes it means nothing at all. Or so I am told." She looked at me again. In that moment, I realized she was just as trapped as I was, only in a different gilded cage. They had given her fine dresses instead of coarse cloth, a bedroom instead of a pallet on the floor, but her body was just as much a territory claimed by others. "If my husband asks you to do anything you do not understand," she said, words careful and measured, "you will remember that I am the one who lives with the consequences of his choices, not him, not you, me. Do you understand?" No one had ever included me in the word consequences before, not like that, as if I were part of an equation, not just a thing carried along by it. I think so, Mom," I said. "Thinking so may not be enough," she replied. Her gaze didn't hold anger exactly, more like a brittle exhaustion. "But I suspect none of us will be given the luxury of deciding." She stepped back, her face smoothing into polite blankness. "You can go." That night the storm finally came. It rolled in from the west, black clouds piling on top of each other, swallowing what was left of the winter light. The air went still in that particular way that makes even birds quiet. By the time the first thunder cracked across the sky, the lamps in the residence were already lit, their flames small and defiant against the dark. Supper was rushed. Guests who might have stayed for conversation left early to beat the rain. The kitchen grew hotter and louder as dishes piled up. I moved through it like a sleepwalker, fetching water, stacking plates, keeping my eyes on my hands so I wouldn't meet anyone else's and risk spilling what was boiling in my chest. The first strike of lightning hit so close that the windows rattled. Someone in the scullery screamed. The housekeeper snapped at her, then crossed herself when she thought no one was looking. "Josiah!" Mr. Tate's voice cut through the din, sharp as a lash. "With me." The words were a summons and a sentence at once. I set down the tray I was carrying and followed him out of the kitchen up the back stairs. My breath shortened as we climbed. The thunder seemed to move inside the walls, closer and closer. We stopped outside a door I'd never been through, the small sitting room that adjoined the governor's private chambers and his wife's bedchamber. I'd dusted its threshold before, but never crossed it. Mr. Tate turned to me. "You will go in when you are called," he said. "You will not speak unless spoken to. You will do what is required. When you are told to leave, you will leave. And when you walk out of this room, you will forget everything that happened inside it." His hand closed around my forearm like a shackle. His eyes, usually half-lidded, were wide now. "Whatever you are about to do, understand. It is not for you. It is not even for her. It is for him, for Virginia. They will say that, at least. But if any word of it passes your lips, boy, I swear, on every God-fearing law of this state, they'll hang you from the first convenient tree and call it justice. Nod if you understand." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. He let go, rapped lightly on the door, then stepped back. "He's here," he said. The door opened just enough for a sliver of lamplight to cut into the dim hallway. The governor's face appeared in the gap, lined and shadowed. He opened the door wider and gestured for me to enter. The sitting room was warm, almost stifling. The fire in the hearth had been stoked high, its light painting the room in flickering gold. A decanter of brandy sat on a small table, 2 glasses beside it. Heavy curtains were drawn over the windows, muffling the storm's noise until it sounded like distant ocean waves rather than nearby thunder. Lydiana stood near the fireplace. She wore a nightgown of white cotton, the fabric finer than anything I'd ever touched, a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her hair was unpinned, falling down her back in loose waves. Her bare feet peeked out from beneath the hem of her gown, pale against the patterned rug. She looked both very young and very old. The governor closed the door behind me with a soft click that sounded in my ears like the turning of a key. "Boy," he said, "stand there." He pointed to a spot near the center of the room. I did as he said. My hands hung useless at my sides. I felt too big for my own skin, too aware of the shape of my body, the space it occupied. He moved to stand beside his wife, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. The gesture would have looked affectionate to an outsider. I saw the way her muscles tightened beneath his fingers. "We have talked at length about duty," he said, as if continuing a conversation I had never been part of. "About what is required of us, of our marriage, of this household. Virginia does not concern itself with the private discomfort of its servants. It concerns itself with appearances, with lineage. We all must make sacrifices." He looked at me. "Including you." The words barely registered through the roaring in my ears. Lydiana lifted her chin. "This is indecent," she said. Her voice trembled but did not break. "It is blasphemous." "It is practical," he replied. "God helps those who help themselves, my dear. And he has seen fit not to help us in the usual way. We must adjust." She laughed then, a short, bitter sound. "Is that what you call this? Adjustment? You would never admit your own failure, so you seek to bury it in someone else's flesh. In mine? In his?" Her eyes flicked to me. For a moment, grief and fury and something like apology tangled there. The governor's jaw tightened. "Lower your voice," he said. I heard the strain beneath his calm. "This is the last time we will speak of it. Once it is done, we will not revisit it. Our child will be ours, legally, socially, in every way that matters." "And in the ways that matter to God?" she pressed. He hesitated, just long enough to show me that question had troubled him in private. Then he smoothed his features. "God gave us dominion over this household," he said. "He understands what is necessary to keep order. I will answer for my decisions when the time comes, as will you, as will he." His gaze fell on me again, pinning me like an insect. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floorboards, to wake up back on some muddy plantation where the horrors were at least familiar. Instead, I stood there, heart pounding, while 2 white people argued about how to use my body as if I were a tool they shared. "Josiah," Lydiana said suddenly. The sound of my name in her mouth was a shock. I looked at her despite myself. "Do you understand what my husband is asking?" she asked. Did I? Not in any way that let me name it. I understood there would be touching, that they expected something to happen between my body and hers that would make a child in her belly. I understood that whatever it wasn't really mine to want or refuse. I think so, Mom, I said. My voice sounded thin. She stepped away from her husband. He is asking you to be complicit in a lie, she continued. to help bring a child into the world who will be taught to hate the blood that made him, to keep quiet while that child is raised to sit at a table you could never approach without bowing. Her words landed like blows. They matched the fear I had not dared to name. The governor's face flushed. "That is enough, Lydiana," he snapped. "The boy does not need philosophy. He needs instruction." "He needs truth," she retorted. "It's the least we can give him, since we're about to take everything else." Her shoulders sagged then, as if some invisible weight had finally settled on them fully. She turned back to me. "I did not choose this," she said. "Not freely. But I am the one who will carry the consequence. You are the one they will punish if anything goes wrong. There is no world in which this is fair to either of us. I know that." She cursed softly under her breath, surprising herself. "But if a child comes of it, I will do everything in my power to protect him. That is the only promise I can make." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I believed her, as much as I could believe anyone in this house. The governor poured himself a glass of brandy and threw it back in one swallow. "Enough," he said. "We are wasting time. The storm will not last forever." He set the glass down with forced calm and moved toward the door. "I will be in my study," he said. "When you are finished, you will call for Tate. This never happened. Do you both understand?" Neither of us answered. He didn't wait to hear. The door closed behind him, leaving Lydiana and me alone with the fire and the muffled thunder. Silence stretched between us, taut as a rope. "I won't force you," she said at last. The statement was so absurd in the face of everything that had brought us to that room that I almost laughed. Force? There were 100 years of force under our feet, built into the very foundation of the house. She could no more unmake that than she could turn back the storm outside. "If you walk out that door now," she continued, "they will drag another boy in, or 10, or a man from the stables. They will find someone, and they will hurt you for defying them. They might hurt others as well. He will not go without an heir. Not now. Not after all his speeches." Her gaze didn't waver. "So perhaps what I should have said is, I won't be cruel to you. Not if I can help it." I stared at her. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "My mother used to say we are all trapped in cages of different sizes," she murmured. "Some are lined with velvet, some with straw. The bars are the same." She drew in a shaky breath. I never understood what she meant until I married Edmund Fairfax. Another thunderclap shook the house. The fire flickered, flared, then steadied. She took a hesitant step toward me. "You are shaking," she observed. I hadn't realized it until she pointed it out. My hands trembled at my sides, my shoulders tight. I don't want to hurt you," I blurted, the words tumbling out without permission. A small, bleak smile touched her lips. "It's funny," she said. "Of all the men who have ever touched me without asking if I wanted it, you are the first to say that." There was no right way to move after that, no clean line through what waited, so we stumbled instead. She asked my name, not boy, not you. "My name?" "Josiah," I said again, feeling it land between us like an offering. "Josiah," she repeated. "I am Lydiana. I suppose that is the one luxury I can offer you tonight, that I will not pretend you are furniture." She reached for my hand. I flinched before I could stop myself, expecting pain. It didn't come. Her fingers were cool and fragile around mine. "This is not romance," she said, her voice nearly breaking on the word. "We are not lovers. We are co-conspirators in something ugly that will be dressed up as a miracle. If you can remember anything kind about tonight, let it be this. I saw you, not just what they want from you." We moved then, clumsy and terrified, through motions neither of us wanted, but both were trapped in. The house around us creaked and groaned under the weight of wind and history. Somewhere deep in the residence, a clock chimed, counting out minutes neither of us would ever get back. I will not dress up what happened with details. The horror of it was not in the mechanics, but in the consent twisted out of shape, the way every touch carried someone else's will. If there was gentleness, it was born not from desire, but from pity. If there was closeness, it was the kind you feel standing next to someone on a gallows. When it was over, she lay very still, staring at the ceiling, her hair fanned around her head, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands, the weight of what had been done pressing down. "Go," she whispered. I stood on unsteady legs, pulling my clothes back into place with hands that didn't feel like mine. At the door I hesitated. "Ma'am?" I said. She didn't look at me. "Yes, Josiah. If a child comes," I began, then faltered. It was too much to name. Will you remember me?" Her eyes closed. When she opened them, there was something fierce in them I hadn't seen before. "If this house ever teaches you that you are forgettable," she said, "know that it is lying. I will remember, even if I am the only one." It was not what I had asked exactly. It was more than I expected. I stepped out into the sitting room, then into the hallway, where Mr. Tate was already waiting, as if he had been standing there the whole time, counting breaths. "Well?" he asked. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not condemn me or her or both of us. He nodded, as if silence were the answer he wanted. "Back to your quarters," he said, "and keep your head down. For the next few months, you don't so much as look in the mistress's direction unless spoken to. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Maybe this house will finally have something to celebrate." It did, in a way. Weeks later, the bleeding stopped. At first, it was a private terror. Lydiana moved through the house with a distracted air, one hand hovering often over her stomach, as if unwilling to commit to touching it fully. The doctor was called. Servants were shooed from rooms. Doors closed and opened. Whispers travelled along the spine of the house. Then came the morning, when the governor emerged from the doctor's visit with a smile so bright it looked almost grotesque on his usually stern face. He called for wine in the middle of the day. He summoned his mother to the residence. He ordered extra candles for the chapel. By afternoon, everyone knew the mistress was carrying. The line between upstairs and downstairs dissolved briefly under the weight of the news. Even in the quarters, people toasted quietly with watered-down spirits, muttering prayers or curses depending on their angle. A child, any child, meant shifts in power. A child sired by the governor's household meant a future of decisions that would ripple down to the lowest stoop. In the kitchen, someone said, "About time," earning herself a sharp glare from the housekeeper. In the laundry, an older woman shook her head. "Woman bleeds for years, can't catch, then suddenly catches right after storm night," she said under her breath. "God got a sense of humor I don't care for." They didn't know what I knew, or they pretended not to. I moved through those weeks like a ghost, my mind always half in another room. Every whispered congratulations I overheard felt like a rope tightening around my chest. Every time I saw the governor clasp a man's hand and accept praise for his blessing, my stomach churned. Lydiana's body changed, slowly at first, then visibly. Her gowns needed letting out. Her gait altered. The faint hollows under her eyes deepened. She touched her belly when she thought no one was looking, an expression of wonder and dread flickering over her face. We did not speak. Not really. In passing, she might nod almost imperceptibly if we crossed paths in a corridor. Once, as I held a door open for her, her hand brushed mine very briefly. It could have been an accident. It didn't feel like one. The governor grew more theatrical. He made a point of attending church with his wife on his arm, of pausing just long enough outside the chapel for people to see the way he rested his hand lightly over the curve of her stomach. In his speeches, he began to sprinkle references to future generations and the Virginia my son will inherit. Behind closed doors, I heard a different tone. The child must be right, he told the doctor one afternoon, as I arranged bottles on a shelf in the adjoining room. You understand. The Almighty will decide the particulars, the doctor replied. The Almighty and the blood we've mixed, the governor counted. There was a sharp edge in his voice that made the hair on my arms stand up. If the child is healthy, there will be no need for difficult discussions. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence that followed spoke loudly. I learned then that there are many ways to kill a child. Some involve hands, some herbs, some simply a refusal to claim what is in front of you. The ugliest ones wear masks of reason. As the months went by, the storm that had marked the start of this arrangement seemed to take up permanent residence in my chest. I lay awake at night in the quarters, listening to the breathing of 30 other bodies, and imagined a small heart beating inside the mistress's belly. Was it like mine had been once? Did it beat faster when she was afraid? Did it know, in some wordless way, that its very existence was a crime in the eyes of the law that would claim it? Sometimes, when I fetched water from the pump behind the residence, the older women watched me with new wariness. They were too wise not to have guessed something. One, a laundress named Ada with hands roughened by lye, caught my arm one day. You stay away from that house when the time comes, she said, without preamble. What time? I asked, though I knew. When she birthed that baby, Ada replied. Men like him, they don't like surprises they can't explain. You don't want to be in sight when somebody notice eyes that don't fit or a shade of skin ain't quite right. Best to be out with the horses or down in the cellar. Somewhere they ain't likely to remember you exist. Her grip tightened. And pray, boy, pray hard. Not for you, for that child. It's coming into a world that don't know what to do with the truth. I didn't know how to pray anymore. The God they spoke of in the governor's church seemed too comfortable with this house's lies. But I nodded anyway. Time, which had moved slowly in my youth, sped up. The curve of Lydiana's belly grew. The house adjusted around it. Carpets were laid softer in certain hallways. Chairs were arranged near windows so she could sit when she tired. People spoke more softly when she was near, as if loud voices might disturb the growing life. One evening, near the end, I saw her by chance in the small garden on the north side of the residence. It was nearly dusk. I had been sent to bring in a set of cushions that had been left out. There she was, alone on a stone bench, one hand on her belly, the other holding a sprig of white jasmine. I stopped the moment I saw her, instinct telling me to back away before she noticed. But her head turned and our eyes met. "Stay," she said. I froze. She patted the bench beside her. "I can give orders too, you know," she added, a hint of ironic humor in her voice. Slowly I approached and stood near the end of the bench, not daring to sit. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "Hear what, ma'am?" She tilted her head, listening. The city hummed faintly in the distance. Wagon wheels, distant laughter, a dog barking. Closer, leaves rustled, insects chirped. The world seemed quieter near her, though, as if the night were holding its breath. "I hear my own heart," she said, and something beneath it, like a bird in a cage, too small for its wings. Her hand moved in slow circles over the stretched fabric. "They tell me it is a strong heartbeat," she continued, "that I should be grateful. They do not understand that every time I feel him move, I think of what waits for him out here. These walls, these expectations, these lies." Her gaze shifted to me. "Does that sound ungrateful to you, Josiah?" "No, Mom," I said quietly. "Sounds like a mother." The word hung between us. Mother. It was the first time either of us had spoken it aloud about the child. She smiled, but it was a sad, crooked thing. "My mother was fond of saying, 'We don't get to choose what kind of story we are born into,'" she said. "Only what we do with the part we are given." I used to think that was nonsense. Now I wonder if it is the only wisdom she ever had. She studied my face. "If he has your eyes," she said softly, "they will torment him. Not because the eyes are wrong, but because people will insist they are." My heart stuttered. "If he has my eyes," I said, before I could stop myself, "at least I'll know he can see." She laughed, startled, genuine. It broke something in both of us. For a brief moment, in that garden, with the light fading and the air smelling of earth and flowers, we were not mistress and slave, sinner and accomplice. We were two people standing on the edge of an event neither of us could control, clinging to small defiances. Days later, the pains began. It was just after midnight when the first low moan drifted down through the floorboards to the servants' quarters. I heard it in my sleep and woke with my heart racing, as if someone had called my name. More sounds followed, hurried footsteps, the creak of doors, the murmur of voices. "Babe is coming," someone whispered. The house moved around the labor like a nervous animal. Lamps were lit, water was boiled, clean linens were pulled from wardrobes. The midwife from down the street, an older woman with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue, was brought in through the back door, her boots leaving wet prints on the tile. "We ain't needed up there," one of the men muttered, pulling his blanket over his head. "Women's business." Ada smacked him lightly. "Everything that happens to women in this world is men's business," she retorted. "They made it that way." I lay on my pallet, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams, listening. The storm that night was inside the house, not outside. Every groan, every muffled cry, every snippet of urgent speech bled down. At some point, Mr. Tate came into the quarters, his face grim. "All hands stay put unless called," he announced. "No wandering. No loitering near the mistress's floor. You hear me? Anyone caught lurking will answer to me." His gaze swept the room and lingered on me a fraction of a second longer than everyone else. It felt like a finger pressed to a bruise. I obeyed, but obedience didn't stop my ears from working. Hours blurred as the labor dragged on. Sometimes the house fell quiet, and I worried something had gone terribly wrong. Then a cry would pierce the silence. Lydiana's voice, raw and primal, stripped of all the refined manners draped over it in public. "Push, my lady," the midwife urged above. "Don't you leave that child halfway between worlds, you hear me?" At one point, through the floor, a man's voice cut into the women's chorus. The governor. "Is there a problem?" he demanded. "Get out of my way," the midwife snapped back. "You want a live heir or not? Then let me do my work. Men and their nerves, out." I imagined his face, affronted. The thought made me almost smile. Then, as dawn was beginning to lighten the sky to a sickly grey, it came. A thin, reedy cry that built quickly into full-throated wailing. A child's cry. For a moment everything in me went still. The others in the quarters paused too, breath caught. "There it is," someone breathed. "A baby." Ada crossed herself 3 times. "Lord, watch over that poor soul," she murmured. The cries above continued, strong, insistent. Other sounds joined them, the excited chatter of maids, the rustle of linens, the low murmur of the midwife's voice. I couldn't make out words. Then, sharply, the tone changed. "Sweet Jesus," a maid squeaked. "Quiet," another hissed. "What did I tell you about your mouth?" A third snapped under her breath. The wailing paused, as if someone had covered the tiny mouth, then resumed, softer. My mind raced. Was he well? Was he misshapen? Did he look like them? Like me? I didn't have to wait long to find out that the question of appearance was already under examination. Later that morning, as the house moved into the strange, exhausted calm that follows great upheaval, I was called to the upper hall to help carry water. I didn't go near the mistress's chamber. My path took me no closer than a curve in the corridor outside the sitting room, but sound travels down. Inside the chamber, the governor's voice was a hiss. "You assured me," he said. "You told me there would be no evidence." "I told you there were probabilities," the doctor replied, clearly agitated. "I told you that, given the boy's features and your wife's, there was a chance the child would present as entirely acceptable. That chance was not large. You gambled. This is the outcome." "The child is not black," the governor insisted. "Not fully. He is swarthy, Mediterranean, perhaps. We can say that." "Say what you like," the doctor said wearily. "The women downstairs will see what they see. Servants talk." "They will not," the governor snapped. "Not if they value their tongues." There was a rustle, the sound of cloth being moved, a soft cooing. "She's beautiful," the midwife said quietly, her voice unbothered by the politics swirling around the newborn. "Strong lungs, good grip. She, a girl?" The governor groaned. "A girl," he muttered. "Of course." His disappointment was a physical thing, souring the air. "Better a living girl than a dead boy," the midwife retorted. "You can't put a crown on a grave." "The law may disagree," he said bitterly. I pressed myself against the wall, bucket handle digging into my palm. My mind's eye painted a picture from their words. A tiny face, skin not as pale as her mother's, not as dark as mine. Features that could be explained away to those who wanted to be fooled, but would always raise questions in those who knew where babies came from. "There are options," the doctor said quietly. The room went still. "I am not murdering my child," Lydiana's voice cut through, more forceful than I had ever heard it. You will not speak of my daughter as if she were a faulty investment." "Lydia," the governor tried. "No," she said. "You asked me to carry this sin in my body. I have done so. I have stretched and split and bled. I will not now watch you erase her to tidy up your reputation. If you wish to be rid of evidence, look in a mirror and start there." Silence followed, thick, dangerous. "You would risk everything?" the governor asked hoarsely. "Our position, our safety, her safety? You know what they do to children like that, once tongues start wagging. You know what they'll say about you, about me." "You were prepared to risk her life to avoid that," Lydiana shot back. "Do not talk to me of risk as if you are a stranger to it." The midwife cleared her throat. "There's a middle road if anyone in this room cares to walk something other than the extremes," she said dryly. "You keep the child. Raise her as yours. When she's old enough and people start asking questions you don't like, you send her away, to relatives, to a school, across the ocean if need be. Say she's delicate, or devout, or whatever story fits your pride. People will believe whatever excuses keep them from looking too closely." "That would kill me," Lydiana whispered. "That would keep her alive," the midwife replied. "Children have survived worse lies from their parents." The governor exhaled slowly. "We will do what we must," he said finally. "For now, she is ours. We will present her as such. The rest can be decided later." His words should have comforted me. They didn't. They sounded like a sentence postponed, not commuted. "Have you thought of a name?" the doctor asked, perhaps trying to move the conversation onto safer ground. Lydiana spoke without hesitation. "Clara," she said. "Clara May Fairfax." "Clara," the midwife repeated, testing it, "means bright, if I remember my Latin." "Yes," Lydiana said. "Let her be bright, even if this house tries to teach her darkness." I carried my bucket away then, the name lodged in my chest like a stone. Clara, my daughter, the governor's daughter, Lydiana's daughter. A child made of too many claims and not enough truth. Years passed. Children grow quickly when you watch them from hidden corners. Clara took her first steps on a rug woven in France, under the watchful eyes of portraits painted in oil. She tumbled often, as all children do, and each time someone caught her before she fell fully. A maid, a visiting aunt, sometimes the governor himself, his face softening against his will as he steadied her. "She has your stubbornness," people told him, when Clara refused to let go of a toy, or insisted on climbing higher than was safe. "She has your eyes," someone told Lydiana once, and no one missed the way she flinched before forcing a smile. No one ever said, "She has the boy's hands," though I saw mine in the shape of her fingers. No one ever said, "She moves like him," though I recognized myself in the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, ready to run. Her skin darkened in the summer, taking on a golden tone that the governor's mother declared unfortunate, but manageable if she stayed out of the sun. "Too much outdoor time is unseemly for girls of her station anyway," the old woman sniffed, insisting on parasols and bonnets. In the winter, under candlelight, Clara looked pale enough to pass in the eyes of people who wanted to believe she was purely Fairfax. In direct sunlight, with her curls escaping their ribbons and her laughter ringing across the lawn, she looked like exactly what she was, the child of this house's greatest lie. I watched her the way a thirsty man watches rain behind glass. At first, from a distance, carrying logs while she toddled in the parlor, sweeping halls as she ran down them with a nurse in pursuit. Sometimes our paths intersected in smaller ways. She might drop a toy in a corridor, and I would pick it up, placing it carefully back in her hand. Her eyes would meet mine, curious, unafraid. "Thank you," she said once, the words still new in her mouth, thick with baby fat. "You're welcome, Miss Clara," I replied, the title bitter and sweet on my tongue. She smiled, showing a gap where a tooth had fallen out. The shape of that smile jolted me. I had seen it in a cracked mirror years ago, on my own face. Over time, the prohibition around me looking at her softened at the edges. Perhaps the governor decided I no longer posed a threat. Perhaps he had convinced himself, through repetition, that Clara was his in all the ways that mattered. Or perhaps he simply forgot to be afraid, consumed as he was by other battles. Politics shifted, new men rose, others fell. The talk in the study turned from expansion to tariffs to secession, each wave of conversation breaking against the same rocks of pride and fear. The governor gave more speeches about unity and destiny. He grew heavier. His hair grew whiter. The child he had once seen as the key to his legacy became, at times, an afterthought. Not to Lydiana. She poured herself into Clara with a ferocity that surprised everyone who had ever called her cold. She oversaw her lessons, argued with tutors who underestimated her, chose her dresses, braided her hair. She corrected her gently when she parroted something cruel she'd overheard about the help. "We do not speak about people like that," she would say firmly. "Not in this house." "Why?" Clara asked once, after hearing a cousin refer to a field hand as breeding stock at a family gathering. "Everyone else does." "Because we are not everyone else," Lydiana replied, "and because blood does not like to be mocked, even when you don't know it's your own." Clara didn't understand that then. She would, later. One summer day, when Clara was about 9, I was repairing a loose board on the back steps as she practiced her skipping rope in the yard. The sun was high, heat shimmering above the brick path. Her bonnet lay discarded on the grass, forgotten. Sweat dampened the curls at her temples. 1, 2, 3, she counted, the rope slapping rhythmically. Her laughter floated over the yard. A dragonfly skimmed low over the small patch of ornamental pond. The air smelled of cut grass and something baking in the kitchen. She misstepped. The rope snagged on her ankle and she stumbled, skinning her knee on the gravel. The rope fell uselessly to one side. There was a moment of shocked silence, and then the wail came, high and heartbreaking. I dropped my hammer and went to her before I could think better of it. "It's all right, Miss Clara," I said, kneeling beside her. Blood welled bright on her pale skin. "Just a scrape. We'll get it cleaned." "It hurts," she sobbed, tears streaking dust down her cheeks. "I know," I said softly. I scooped her up, the way I had once scooped up the housemaid's boy. She fit against me, like she'd been made for that space, her weight warm, her small hand clutching at my shirt. "But you're all right. Falling down's part of jumping. World does that to us sometimes. Doesn't mean you stop jumping." Her crying eased into hiccups. She pressed her face into my shoulder. One of her tears slid down my neck, hot. "What's that you're saying?" a voice snapped. I looked up. The governor's mother stood at the edge of the veranda, parasol in hand, her expression a storm cloud. She fell, Mom," I said quickly. "I was bringing her to—" "I can see that," she interrupted. "Put her down." A man in your position has no business holding a young lady of hers." The words "your position" carried centuries in them. Clara lifted her head. "Grandmama, he was helping me," she protested. "I tripped." "Help comes in many forms," the old woman said. "Some of it is appropriate, some is not. You're too old to be carried around like a baby, Clara, and he is too old to be carrying you for any reason. Do you understand?" Clara looked between us, confused. "But he works here," she said. "He's nice to me." "Niceness," her grandmother said sharply, "is not the same as propriety. Set her down, boy." I lowered Clara gently to the ground. She winced as her scraped knee bent. I stepped back, hands raised slightly, showing empty palms. My chest felt tight, as if an invisible rope had been drawn around it and pulled. "Go fetch her mother," the old woman told me. "Now." I went. On the way, anger burned in my throat like bile. Not at being ordered, that was familiar. At hearing the uglier implications under the caution. They saw dirt even where there was only blood and tears. Later, as I passed by the parlor, I heard raised voices. "You will not speak about Josiah like that in front of my daughter again," Lydiana said. "I will not have that boy pawing at her," the old woman retorted. "You know how these things start. One minute it's bandaging a knee, the next—" "My daughter is not some plantation mistress in a rumor you half remember," Lydiana snapped. "And Josiah is not whatever crude fantasy you are projecting on him. He was helping her. That is all." "The neighbors won't see it that way," the old woman sniffed. "They see a big, dark buck with his hands on a young girl. They won't stop to ask about scraped knees. They'll go straight to rope." There it was again, that rope always waiting. "In which case the problem will be their minds, not his hands," Lydiana said coldly. "But I will speak to him myself." She found me that evening near the pump. "I heard what happened," she said. "I meant no," I began. "I know," she cut in. "You do not have to defend yourself to me." That was new. She exhaled, looking very tired. "I used to think having a child would make me more secure," she said. "It has only given this world more things to threaten." We stood in silence a moment, the smell of damp earth around us. "I would never hurt her," I said quietly. "I know," she repeated. "That is precisely why I am afraid for you." We lived in that tension for years. Clara grew, the house shifted around her, and the secret of her conception remained buried under routines and appearances. But secrets are like damp in a wall. They eventually find their way through to the surface. As Clara approached adolescence, her features sharpened. The soft roundness of childhood gave way to angles and planes. Her hair darkened a shade, curls thickening. Her eyes, my eyes, stayed the same, a deep, steady brown that saw more than people thought. Guests who hadn't seen her in years would comment, "My, Clara, you've grown," they'd say. "You look so exotic." The word was meant as a compliment, a genteel way of saying, "Not quite like us." Lydiana's smile would tighten each time. The whispers among the servants shifted too. Where once they had been cautious, speculative, now they took on a tone of grim certainty. "Look at the way her hair kinks at the back," one maid murmured. "That ain't just from her mamma's side." "The good book says nothing stays hidden," a footman replied. "Not forever." I avoided those conversations. It felt indecent to gossip about my own child, even anonymously. Instead, I kept to myself as much as possible, throwing my energy into work, into mending, into anything that kept my hands busy enough to quiet my mind. Then, when Clara was around 12, a man came to the house who would pry at all the seams we'd worked so hard to stitch shut. His name was Thomas Reed, a distant cousin of the governor's from another county. He was a lawyer with ambitions of his own, the kind of visitor who spends as much time watching as talking. From the moment he arrived, he took an interest in Clara that was not unkind, but unsettling. "How old are you now, Clara?" he asked at dinner, in front of the family and several guests. 12, sir," she replied, sitting up straighter. 12, he mused. "Almost a young lady. You must be thinking about schooling." "We are considering options," the governor replied smoothly. "She is currently receiving instruction at home." Reed's gaze lingered on Clara's face. "I imagined schooling in Richmond would be complicated," he said. "So many opinions, so many eyes." The words were innocuous enough on the surface. Underneath, they rippled with implication. Later that evening I passed by the study and heard low, urgent voices. "Say what you mean, Thomas," the governor said. "I mean that people talk," Reed replied. "They've been talking for years, about the timing, about the way that girl looks under certain light. You think the legislature is populated entirely by fools and the blind?" "They would not dare," the governor began. "Of course they would dare," Reed cut in. "Men are cowards. They will say behind your back what they would never say to your face. They couch it in concern. 'We worry about the Fairfax legacy,' they murmur. 'We hope the girl's unusual coloring won't cause trouble later.' They grin. They toast your speeches. Then they add another tally mark on the list of reasons not to back your next proposal." The governor cursed under his breath. "So what do you suggest?" he asked. "Kill her? Send her to a convent?" "Don't be melodramatic," Reed said. "I suggest you do what other families in your position have done for generations. You send her away, not now. That would look suspicious, but soon. To a boarding school in the north, perhaps, or to relatives in Europe. Somewhere where her presence does more good than harm. As an asset in a marriage arrangement, maybe. There are men who would be happy to have a pretty Fairfax girl, regardless of rumors, if the dowry is right." "And what would you have me tell my wife?" the governor asked. "She would sooner let her own veins be opened than let that child out of her sight." "You tell her a story she can live with," Reed replied. "That Clara will be safer away from the ugliness of politics, that she will get an education, see the world. Mothers are not hard to manipulate when you frame prison as protection." I stepped away before I could hear more. My fists were clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The idea of my daughter being sent far away, alone among strangers who would treat her like a symbol rather than a person, made my vision swim. Later that week, as if on cue, Clara sought me out. "I have questions," she announced, appearing in the doorway of the small room off the kitchen where I was repairing a chair. "Does your mother know you're down here?" I asked. "She knows I wander," Clara said. "She also knows you don't bite, do you?" The teasing note in her voice almost made me smile. "Not unless provoked, Miss Clara." "Then you're safer than half the men upstairs," she muttered. She came in, closing the door behind her. That small act felt enormous. "How old were you when you knew who you were?" she asked. The question startled me. "What do you mean?" "When you knew you were you," she clarified. "Not just what other people said you were." I considered. "I'm not sure I've ever had that luxury," I said slowly. "Mostly I've been told what I am." You and me both, she replied. She sat on the edge of the work table, swinging her feet. Only lately I've started to doubt the story. I put down the hammer. What story is that? That I am simply Clara May Fairfax, daughter of Edmund and Lydiana, she said. No qualifiers, no asterisks, no whispers attached. I hear things, Josiah. I may be sheltered, but I am not deaf. Her voice cracked slightly on my name. She had taken to using it when we were alone, in small, stolen moments like this. It was an intimacy that frightened and nourished me. I hear the way some people talk about me when they think I'm out of earshot, she continued. The way the Albright boy called me moolish under his breath last Sunday. I pretended not to know what he meant. I knew. I swallowed. Children can be cruel. So can adults, she said. They just use better vocabulary. She leaned forward. My grandmother calls it Mediterranean coloring, she said, mimicking the old woman's tone. As if we have a cousin in Italy no one has mentioned. I'm not stupid, Josiah. We own people. You think I haven't noticed how many of them look more like me than my cousins do? The room felt very small. What are you asking me? I said quietly. She looked at me a long moment. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I'm asking if I'm crazy, if I'm making ghosts where there are none, or if the ghosts are real and everyone is just pretending not to see them. It was the closest anyone had ever come to speaking the truth aloud. I can't answer that without putting you in danger, I said. Danger? She scoffed. I live in a house where my existence is a bargaining chip. You think the danger isn't already here? Her eyes, so like mine, shone with anger. Tell me this then, she said. If you had a child whose life depended on a lie, would you want them to know? The question sliced me open. I would want them to know they were loved, I said. Whether they ever knew the particulars or not. That's not an answer, she said. It's the only one I have that doesn't get you killed, I replied. We stared at each other, trapped on opposite sides of an invisible line drawn long before either of us was born. She sighed, sliding off the table. They're going to send me away, she said. I can feel it. They talk about schools and opportunities. My father says girls of my class must be prepared to move in certain circles. My mother cries more often than she thinks I see. I clenched my jaw. Do you want to go? I want to exist in a place where my face doesn't make people whisper, she said. I don't know if such a place exists. She moved toward the door, then paused. If I go, will you miss me? She asked, her voice suddenly small. More than you will ever know, I wanted to say. More than my own skin. Yes, Miss Clara, I said instead. I will. She nodded, as if that was all she'd needed to hear. Then that's one thing I know for certain, she said. Thank you. She opened the door. Oh, and Josiah? Yes? I think I know, she said. Who I am. At least a little, even if no one ever says it. That's something they can't take. She left before I could respond. The decision came officially 2 months later. There was a family meeting. One of those stiff affairs where everyone sat upright and pretended their lives were orderly while the ground shifted under their feet. Clara, the governor began, your mother and I have been discussing your future. Have you? She replied. Without me? It is our responsibility to plan, he said. You will thank us later. He laid out the story much as Reed had suggested. There was a fine school in Philadelphia that took girls from the best families. There she would receive an education befitting her status. She would learn languages, music, etiquette. She would be positioned for a good marriage, a secure life. It is also safer, he added. Richmond is volatile. There is ugliness in politics I do not wish you to be exposed to. The ugliness lives in this house too, Clara said under her breath. Only Lydiana seemed to hear. Her jaw tightened. What your father means, Lydiana said, forcing her voice into calm, is that the world is changing. We cannot control it. But we can try to control where you stand when the changes come. I want you alive, Clara. I want you free, in whatever way we can manage. Clara's gaze bounced between them. So, I am to be sent away for my own good, she said. Forgive me if I don't burst into gratitude. You will go, the governor said. That is settled. We leave in 3 weeks for Philadelphia. I will accompany you. See that you are properly placed. 3 weeks. The house thrummed with preparations. New dresses were ordered, trunks aired out, letters exchanged. There were lists and fittings and tearful conversations behind closed doors. I watched it all from the edges, carrying boxes, hauling trunks, my heart beating time with the hammer blows of nails securing Clara's future. On her last night in the house, she came to me again. This time she didn't knock. You're not supposed to be here, I said softly. We were in the dim hallway near the servants' entrance, where lamplight didn't quite reach. Half my life, I'm not supposed to be anywhere, she replied. I've stopped letting that stop me. She stepped closer. In the low light, the contours of her face blurred, making her look both younger and older. I don't know when I'll see you again, she said, if ever. You'll write, I said, surprising myself. She snorted. Who would I address the letters to? To my father's servant, who might be more than that, but no one will say. The words slammed into the space between us. My breath caught. Clara, I'm not stupid, Josiah, she whispered. I know how old you are. I know when my mother's belly swelled and what people said. I know the math. I know what my face looks like. No one has to spell it out for me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. If you say such things aloud, I began. I won't, she said quickly. I'm reckless. Not suicidal. I just couldn't leave without letting you know, that I see you when I look in the mirror. Tears pricked my eyes. I blinked them away. Seeing is one thing, I said hoarsely. Claiming is another. You must never do the second. Not if you want to live long enough to make your own choices. She nodded, lips pressed tight. I hate that, she said. I hate that the truth could kill us. So do I said. But I love that you exist more than I hate anything. Silence fell, dense and sacred. Then give me a blessing, she said suddenly. I stared. I am in no position. You are in the only position that matters, she cut in. You are my... She stopped herself just in time. You are Josiah. That is enough. I swallowed hard. All right, I whispered. I lifted my hand, hesitated, then placed it gently on her head, fingers barely touching her hair. It was a dangerous gesture in this house, in this world. It felt like a prayer anyway. May you go where people see you clearly and aren't afraid of what they see, I murmured. May no man ever claim you as proof of his own worth. May you never have to barter your body to survive. May you be loved for all of who you are, even the parts no one here will name. And may you live long enough to forgive us, if you can, for the way we failed you before you even opened your eyes." Her shoulders shook. She pressed her face against my chest just for a second before stepping back. "If I survive," she said, "I'll make sure our story does too. That's my blessing for you." She left me there in the half-dark, with that promise buzzing in my ears, like the echo of an old hymn. The next morning, she was gone. The house felt emptier, though it still bustled. Lydiana moved through it like a ghost. The governor threw himself into work. Life, as it always does in such places, continued, pretending not to notice the whole. Years passed. News came in bits. Letters from Philadelphia, then from Boston, then from somewhere in Europe. I never saw them, of course. But I saw Lydiana's face when they arrived, the way it softened as she read, the way her hand lingered over certain phrases. I knew enough to imagine. The war came. Virginia burned itself and others for a flag, and an idea that had always been rotten. The governor died before it ended, his heart giving out under the strain or from the weight of his own contradictions. I was never sure. The residence changed hands. The people in it changed titles. The institution that had owned my body on paper was dismantled, though its shadows stayed long on the ground. I found freedom without fanfare. Papers were signed. Chains were removed from law books, but not from hearts. I left the residence one morning with my worldly possessions in a small bundle and walked into a city that didn't know what to do with me. For a while I drifted, took work where I could find it, on docks, in shops, in homes where the ghosts of ownership lingered in furniture and habits. I learned to read, slowly, letter by letter, at a church that believed literacy was a weapon against the old ways. I wrote my name on paper for the first time and felt something click into place. Years later, how many I will not say, I found myself back in Richmond. The residency had changed. The paint had peeled in places. The trees were taller, new flags flew, but the bones of the building were the same. I stood across the street and watched it one evening. The sky bruised purple behind its pillars. People went in and out, carrying papers instead of silver trays. They did not know the stories soaked into the floorboards beneath their feet. A woman approached me then, middle-aged, well-dressed in a plain, dark gown that spoke of money without ostentation. Her hair was streaked with grey, pulled back neatly. Her skin was the color of coffee with too much milk. Her eyes were mine. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Josiah?" My throat closed. "Who's asking?" I managed. She smiled, a little crooked. "Someone who made a promise a long time ago," she said, "to survive and to remember." "Clara," I breathed. Hearing her name aloud after so many years was like opening a door to a room I had sealed shut. She nodded. "Clara Reed," she said. "Names change. Blood doesn't." We stood there, two survivors of a story that had tried very hard to swallow us. "How did you find me?" I asked. "My mother wrote about you," she said, in letters she never sent. I found them after she died. She called you the boy they used to solve a problem, and created 10 more in the process. She called you the gentlest person in this house full of brutes. I figured the city can't be full of men named Josiah who used to work in that house and walk like they're still listening for someone calling boy from behind them. Tears blurred my vision. "Is she—" I couldn't finish. "Gone," Clara said softly. But she went knowing I knew. About everything. I read every word she wrote, every confession, every excuse, every apology. "I'm sorry," I said. It felt inadequate for the ocean of harm. I'm not, she replied. If she hadn't done what she did, I wouldn't be here. If you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't either. I have spent my life learning to hold that paradox without letting it break me. She took a breath. I wanted to see you, she went on, to show you that I lived, that I made a life that is not entirely built on their lies. I teach now in a school where children with faces like ours are allowed to read without permission. Pride flickered in her eyes. I tell them stories about power and survival. Sometimes I leave the names out. Sometimes I don't. We sat on a bench in a small park nearby and talked until the sky went dark. She told me about her years away, the kindnesses she'd met, the cruelties that followed her anyway, the way she had eventually claimed her story as her own. I told her about my wandering, my clumsy steps into a freedom that had no map. At some point, she said, "There's something else. My students, they listen. The world is different now, but not so different that the past doesn't linger. They ask me how such things happened, how people could live in houses like that and not know. I tell them the house knew, the walls heard, the ledgers recorded. The only question is whether anyone will read them honestly." She turned to me. "I want your version," she said. "Not just my mother's, not just what I've pieced together from scraps. I want it in your words, so that when I tell it, I'm not just exorcising my own ghosts, I'm honoring yours." I looked at my hands. The skin was darker, more lined, but they were still mine. These were the hands that had carried trays, held a crying child, been forced to touch a woman in service of a lie, blessed a daughter I could not claim. "It's not an easy story," I said. "The important ones never are," she replied. So I wrote, slowly, painfully, but with a clarity I had never had when I was living it. I wrote about ebony stair rails and white pillars, about storm nights and whispered bargains, about a boy who went into a room as a tool and came out as a father in a world that had no word for such a thing. I wrote it for her, for the children she taught, for anyone who ever walked through a beautiful building and thought it had always been just offices and speeches. And I wrote it for you, because if you've listened this far, the story belongs to you now too. You've walked the halls with me. You've heard the storm. You've felt the weight of choices made by people who never had to carry their full consequences. If any part of this story has stayed with you, if you found yourself angry or grieving or quietly unsettled, I want you to do one more thing. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story we dig up from under polished floors. Tap the like so the algorithm knows. These buried truths still matter. And tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest, or which question you're still turning over in your mind.